The dust-streaked horizon swallowed the dying sun as Savannah Zimmerman stood on her father's porch, watching the silhouette of a lone rider disappear into the blazing canvas of orange and purple. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not today. Not when she needed to be stronger than ever before. It was 1876 in Laredo, Texas, a town where everyone knew everyone's business, and Savannah had just committed the unforgivable sin, falling in love with Xavier Sinclair, a man without roots. "He'll never come back for you," her father's voice boomed from behind her. "No good drifters never do," but Savannah knew differently. In the 3 months Xavier had worked on their ranch, she'd glimpsed something in those deep green eyes that told a story different from the rumors that followed him. A story of honor, of pain, of a man searching for something he couldn't name. "He promised," she whispered, more to herself than to her father. Sheriff Zimmerman snorted, his weathered face creasing with disappointment. "Promises from men like that ain't worth the air they're spoken on. You've disgraced this family, Savannah. The whole town's talking." Savannah turned to face her father, her chin raised defiantly despite the heaviness in her heart. At 22, she was old enough to make her own choices, but in Laredo, a woman's reputation was everything. "I don't care what they say. Xavier is coming back for me." Her father's expression hardened. "Then you can wait for him somewhere else. I won't have my daughter pining after some saddle tramp." The words stung worse than any physical blow. "Pa, please, you have until morning to decide. Either forget that man and apologize to the Hendersons for turning down their boy's proposal, or pack your things." The door slammed behind him, leaving Savannah alone with the fading light and the weight of a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Morning came with a crispness that belied the heat to follow. Savannah stood on Main Street with a carpetbag at her feet and a letter clutched in her hand, a recommendation from her father's reluctant hand to the widow Barnes, who needed help running her boarding house on the edge of town. "You're a fool, Savannah Zimmerman," Clara Wilson hissed as she passed by, pulling her young daughter closer as though Savannah's situation might be catching. "Throwing away your future for a man who's probably halfway to California by now." Savannah said nothing, keeping her gaze fixed on the horizon. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Xavier had promised, and that was enough for her. The widow Barnes's boarding house was a 2-story affair with peeling paint and crooked shutters, but it was clean and solid. The widow herself was a stern woman with kind eyes that belied her reputation for strictness. "I don't care about your situation," she told Savannah bluntly after reading the sheriff's letter, "but I do care about the reputation of my establishment. You'll work hard, keep to yourself, and give no one reason to gossip more than they already are." "Understood," Savannah nodded, grateful for the roof over her head and the chance to earn her keep. "Yes, madam, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the widow replied, leading her to a small room at the back of the house. "The work is hard and the pay is modest, and if that man of yours does come back, he's not welcome inside these walls without a wedding ring." The days bled into weeks, then months. Savannah rose before dawn each morning to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly traveling salesmen, and the occasional cowhand passing through. She scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, changed bedding, and learned to smile politely when the townsfolk pretended she didn't exist on her trips to the general store. At night, she wrote letters to Xavier that she couldn't send because she didn't know where to send them. She told him about her day, about the humiliation of being treated like a fallen woman for the crime of loving freely, about how she still believed in him when no one else did. "She's a cautionary tale, that one," she overheard Mrs. Peterson say to her daughter outside the church one Sunday. "That's what happens when you set your cap for a man with no roots and no honor." 6 months after Xavier rode out of Laredo, the first snow fell. Savannah pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she hurried back from delivering clean linens to the doctor's office. The money wasn't much, but the widow had allowed her to take on extra work to save for a future Savannah refused to stop believing in. Miss Zimmerman. Savannah turned to find Dr. Harrison's wife standing in the doorway of the millinery shop. Unlike most of the town's women, Margaret Harrison had always been kind if distant. "Mrs. Harrison," Savannah acknowledged with a small nod. "I was wondering if you might be available to help with a small gathering I'm hosting next week. Just some refreshments and tidying up. My usual girl has taken ill." It was the first time anyone of standing had offered her work that didn't involve scrubbing something. Savannah knew it was probably just because Margaret was desperate, but the chance to earn extra money was too good to pass up. "I'd be happy to help, madam." "Thank you." The Harrisons lived in a handsome 2-story house that made Savannah's heart ache for the home she'd left behind. As she helped set out tea things and arranged flowers, she couldn't help but notice the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. "I don't see why you had to hire her," she overheard Constance Murphy say in the parlor. "There are plenty of respectable girls who need the work." "Savannah Zimmerman was always respectable," Margaret replied firmly, "and she's the hardest worker I know. Her only crime was believing in love." "Love?" Constance scoffed. "That man was nothing but trouble. Did you know he was involved in that business up in Kansas City? The robbery at the First National Bank? Those were just rumors, Constance." "Well, Sheriff Pollard in Wichita seems to think differently. I heard he's posted wanted notices all across the territory." Savannah's hands trembled as she set down the tray she was carrying. Wanted notices? It couldn't be true. She'd known Xavier had a past, but he'd been trying to leave that behind. He told her so the night before he left, when he'd promised to return for her once he'd made things right. That evening, after the last guest had departed, and Savannah had been paid for her work, Margaret Harrison pressed a small package into her hands. "I thought you might want these," she said quietly. "They arrived at the post office last week. My husband heard about them from the postmaster." Inside the brown paper wrapping were 3 wanted posters. Xavier's face stared back at her, a crude sketch that didn't capture the warmth of his smile or the depth of his eyes, but was recognizable nonetheless. "Wanted: Xavier Sinclair. Bank robbery, horse theft, assault. $500 reward." Savannah's world collapsed around her. Had it all been lies? The gentle words, the promises of return, the future they'd planned together. "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly. "I thought you should know." Savannah managed to thank her through numb lips before walking back to the boarding house in a daze. That night, she burned every letter she'd written to Xavier, watching the flames consume the words of a woman who'd believed in something that never existed. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new faces to Laredo. Among them was Thomas Blackwell, a businessman from back east looking to invest in cattle. Handsome and charming, he took a room at the Widow Barnes's boarding house and seemed determined to break through Savannah's carefully constructed walls. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her each morning with a tip of his hat and a smile that spoke of privilege and confidence. "You're looking lovely today." Savannah kept her responses polite but distant. She'd learned her lesson about men with smooth words and easy smiles. "The town dance is this Saturday," he told her one day as she served breakfast. "I'd be honored if you'd accompany me." The dining room fell silent. Everyone knew Savannah Zimmerman was untouchable, the girl who'd thrown away her reputation for a drifter who'd abandoned her. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackwell," she replied quietly, "but I don't attend such functions." "A tragedy," he said, undeterred. "Perhaps I could call on you here then. We could sit on the porch where the widow can chaperone. Before Savannah could refuse, the widow herself spoke up. That would be appropriate, I think. Savannah has Sundays off after church. And just like that, Savannah found herself reluctantly accepting Thomas Blackwell's attentions. He was persistent, calling every Sunday with flowers or small gifts. He never mentioned her past, never seemed concerned with the whispers that followed them down the street. You should consider his suit seriously, the widow advised her after a month of these visits. He's a good man with prospects. Not many women get a second chance like this. But something held Savannah back. It wasn't that she was still waiting for Xavier. She'd forced herself to accept that he'd never truly cared for her. It was something about Thomas himself, something too perfect, too rehearsed in his devotion. Spring turned to summer, and with the heat came news that churned through Laredo like wildfire. Xavier Sinclair had been captured in Colorado territory after a shootout with lawmen. He was being transported back to Kansas to stand trial. Justice at last, Savannah overheard her father say to the barber when she passed the shop on her way to market. That man nearly ruined my daughter's life. That night, Savannah dreamed of Xavier, not the outlaw from the wanted posters, but the man who'd worked alongside her father's ranch hands, who'd taught her to shoot straight and ride fearlessly, who'd looked at her like she was the sunrise after a long, dark night. "I'm coming back for you," dreamed Xavier whispered. "I promised." She woke with tears on her cheeks and an ache in her chest that wouldn't subside. 2 weeks later, as Savannah was hanging laundry in the backyard of the boarding house, she heard a commotion from the street out front. Shouts and the pounding of hooves sent her hurrying around the side of the building, laundry basket forgotten. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. At its center, a man in handcuffs was being led from a prison wagon. Even with his face half hidden by dirt and a week's worth of beard, Savannah would know him anywhere, Xavier. Their eyes met across the distance, and the world fell away. She saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something that looked like shame. Then he was inside the jail and the crowd was dispersing, their hunger for spectacle temporarily satisfied. "They say he's to be taken to Kansas City tomorrow." Thomas Blackwell's voice came from behind her. Savannah hadn't noticed him approach. "Good riddance, I'd say. Men like that bring nothing but trouble." Savannah couldn't respond. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain Thomas must hear it. "I've been meaning to speak with you about something important," he continued, oblivious to her distress. "Perhaps we could walk to the park." Unable to think of a plausible excuse, Savannah allowed him to escort her to the small green space at the center of town. There, beneath an oak tree, Thomas Blackwell asked Savannah Zimmerman to be his wife. "I know about your past," he said, holding her hands in his. "I know about the drifter and the scandal, but that doesn't matter to me. I see the woman you are, hardworking, loyal, beautiful. Say you'll marry me, Savannah. Let me take you away from all this." It was everything she should want: redemption, security, a chance to hold her head high again. Yet all she could think about was Xavier, locked in a cell just 100 yards away. "I need time to consider," she managed to say. "This is unexpected." Thomas frowned but nodded. "Of course, take the day. But remember, Savannah, opportunities like this don't come along often for women in your position." The implication was clear. Thomas Blackwell was offering salvation, and only a fool would refuse it. That night, Savannah paced her small room, torn between what her head told her was wise and what her heart refused to let go. Just before midnight, she made her decision. Slipping on her boots and shawl, she crept out of the boarding house and made her way to the sheriff's office. Deputy Miles Johnson was on night duty, a young man who'd once courted Savannah before her father had deemed him unsuitable. "Savannah," he said in surprise when she knocked on the door. "What are you doing here at this hour?" "I need to see him, Miles," she said softly. "Just for a few minutes." "Please," Miles looked uncomfortable. "You know I can't do that. Sheriff would have my badge." "5 minutes," Savannah pleaded. "No one will know. I need answers." Perhaps it was the history between them, or perhaps it was the desperation in her voice, but Miles relented. 5 minutes. "And if anyone comes, you hid in here without my knowledge." "Understood." The cell area was dim, lit only by a single lantern. Xavier sat on the edge of a narrow cot, his head in his hands. When he heard footsteps, he looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of her. "Savannah," he breathed, rising to his feet. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not," she agreed, stopping just short of the cell bars. "But I needed to see you, to understand." Xavier's face was thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of hardship. But those eyes, they were still the same, still looked at her with the same intensity that had captured her heart. "I never robbed any banks," he said quietly, "or stole horses or assaulted anyone. Those charges are false." Savannah wanted to believe him. "Then why did you leave? Why didn't you come back like you promised?" Xavier gripped the bars between them. "I left to clear my name. My brother, my twin brother, Zachary, he's the one on those wanted posters. He's been using my name since he started running with the James gang 3 years ago. I rode out to find him, to make him confess." "You have a twin brother," Savannah whispered, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" Pain flashed across Xavier's face. "Because I was ashamed. Zach and I were raised by different families after our parents died. He went bad, real bad. I've spent years trying to outrun his reputation. I thought if I could find him, make him turn himself in, I could come back to you with a clean slate." "Did you find him?" Xavier nodded grimly. "In Colorado, but when I confronted him, there was a shootout with some lawmen tracking him. Zach was killed, and since I matched the description on the wanted posters." He shrugged helplessly. "No one believed I wasn't him. They're taking me to Kansas tomorrow to stand trial for crimes I didn't commit." Savannah's mind raced. "We need to tell the sheriff, get a telegram to Kansas." "I've tried," Xavier interrupted. "No one believes me. Why would they? Twin brothers sounds like the oldest trick in the book." "I believe you," Savannah said fiercely. "I always knew you weren't what they said." Xavier's eyes softened. "After all this time, even though I broke my promise to come back, you're here now, aren't you?" Tears spilled down Savannah's cheeks. "Even if it's not how either of us planned it." A noise from the front office made them both freeze. "Time's up," Miles called softly. "Someone's coming." Savannah reached through the bars, her fingers brushing Xavier's cheek. "I'll find a way to help you. I promise." As Miles hurried her out the back door, Savannah's mind was already forming a plan. It was dangerous, and would likely cost her what little standing she had left in Laredo, but she couldn't let Xavier be punished for crimes he didn't commit. The next morning, Savannah rose early and dressed with care. Instead of her usual work dress, she put on the one nice gown she still owned, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up in a style that softened her features. "My goodness," the widow remarked when Savannah came downstairs. "You're certainly making an effort today. Is this for Mr. Blackwell's benefit?" "In a way," Savannah replied vaguely. "I've made my decision about his proposal." The widow's eyes lit up. "A wise choice, I'm sure. He's a good match for you, Savannah. Better than you could have hoped for, given the circumstances." Savannah just smiled and excused herself. Her first stop was the telegraph office, where she sent messages to the sheriffs in 3 different Kansas towns, asking for confirmation of Xavier Sinclair's description, and whether they had any information about a twin brother. It cost nearly all her savings, but it was worth it if there was even a chance of clearing Xavier's name. Her next stop was Thomas Blackwell's room at the hotel where he conducted his business. She knocked firmly, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. "Savannah." Thomas looked pleasantly surprised when he opened the door. "I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon. Please come in." She stepped just inside the door but remained standing. "I've come to give you my answer, Mr. Blackwell." His face brightened. "And I'm afraid I must decline your proposal." She held up a hand when he began to protest. "You're a fine man, and any woman would be fortunate to have your affection, but I cannot in good conscience marry a man when my heart belongs to another." Thomas's expression darkened. "You can't still be harboring feelings for that criminal. He abandoned you, Savannah, left you to face the town's scorn alone." "There's more to the story than you know," she said carefully. "And regardless, I cannot change how I feel. I'm sorry if I've caused you any pain." She turned to leave, but Thomas caught her arm. "You're making a terrible mistake," he said, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Do you think anyone else in this town will have you after you've refused me? You'll die a spinster, Savannah, remembered only as the fool who threw away everything for a man headed to the gallows." Savannah pulled free of his grip, a chill running down her spine at the coldness in his eyes. "Then that will be my choice to live with. Good day, Mr. Blackwell." She left the hotel with her head held high, ignoring the stares that followed her. Her next destination was the office of Judge Harmon, the circuit judge who happened to be in Laredo hearing cases that week. The judge was a stern man with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through Savannah as she explained her situation. "You're asking me to delay the prisoner's transport based on telegrams that haven't even been answered yet?" he asked when she'd finished. "Yes, Your Honor. Just until we receive replies. If I'm wrong, if Xavier really is guilty, then nothing is lost but a day or two. But if I'm right, an innocent man is being sent to face punishment for another's crimes." Judge Harmon studied her for a long moment. "You understand that interfering in legal proceedings is itself a crime, Miss Zimmerman?" Savannah swallowed hard but nodded. "I do, Your Honor, but I also believe that justice matters more than procedure." Something like respect flickered in the judge's eyes. "Very well. I'll speak to Sheriff Wilson about delaying the transport until tomorrow, but only until then. And if your telegrams don't bring the proof you're hoping for, young lady, you'd best be prepared to say goodbye to that man forever." Relief washed over Savannah. "Thank you, Your Honor, thank you." The rest of the day passed in agonizing slowness. Savannah returned to the boarding house, where the widow informed her coldly that Thomas Blackwell had checked out and left town, apparently on urgent business. "He mentioned your refusal," the widow added disapprovingly. "I hope you know what you're doing, Savannah. Men like Thomas Blackwell don't come along every day." "No," Savannah agreed quietly. "They don't." By evening, there had been no responses to her telegrams. Savannah paced her room, alternating between prayer and planning what she would do if Xavier was taken away. Could she follow him to Kansas? Would they allow her to visit him in prison? How could she prove his innocence when the only person who could confirm his story was dead? She was still awake well after midnight when a sharp knock came at the boarding house door. Throwing on her robe, Savannah hurried downstairs before the noise could wake the other boarders. She opened the door to find Deputy Miles looking agitated. "Savannah, you need to come to the telegraph office right away," he said in a hushed tone. "3 replies just came in from Kansas. Judge Harmon wants you there for the reading." Her heart pounding, Savannah quickly changed and followed Miles through the silent streets. At the telegraph office, Judge Harmon and Sheriff Wilson were waiting, both looking grave. "Miss Zimmerman," the judge nodded, "the replies to your inquiries have arrived. Sheriff, please read them for the record." Sheriff Wilson cleared his throat and picked up the first telegram. From Sheriff J. Davis, Topeka. Xavier Sinclair wanted for bank robbery. Stop 6 feet tall. Stop dark hair. Stop scar across left palm. Stop. Savannah's breath caught. Xavier's scar is on his right palm, not his left. He got it breaking a wild horse on our ranch. The sheriff ignored her and continued to the second telegram. From Sheriff P. Morgan, Wichita. Sinclair identified by bank teller. Stop blue eyes. Stop speaks with slight southern drawl. Stop reward still stands. Stop. Xavier's eyes are green, Savannah interjected, and he has no accent at all. Judge Harmon held up a hand to silence her as Sheriff Wilson read the final telegram. From Marshall T. Reynolds, Kansas City. Rumors of Sinclair twin brother confirmed. Stop Zachary and Xavier Sinclair, born 1850, Lawrence, Kansas. Stop. Separated after parents' death in fire 1855. Stop Zachary, known associate of James gang. Stop Xavier, no criminal record. Stop. The room fell silent. Savannah could hardly breathe, hoping against hope that this would be enough. Finally, Judge Harmon spoke. Sheriff, I believe we need to question the prisoner again. If his story aligns with these telegrams, we may have the wrong man in custody. Dawn was breaking over Laredo when Xavier Sinclair was released from his cell. He emerged from the sheriff's office looking dazed, his eyes immediately seeking out Savannah, who waited across the street, hardly daring to believe this was real. The charges have been dropped, Sheriff Wilson announced to the small crowd that had gathered. This man is not the Xavier Sinclair wanted in Kansas. That man was his twin brother, Zachary Sinclair, who is now deceased. This man is free to go. Xavier crossed the street in long strides, stopping just short of Savannah, uncertainty in his eyes. You saved my life, he said softly. After everything, you still believed in me. Savannah reached for his hand, running her thumb across the scar on his right palm. I never stopped. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her like he'd never let go. I'm so sorry, Savannah, for leaving, for not coming back sooner. I thought I was doing the right thing, trying to clear my name before returning to you. You're here now, she whispered against his chest. That's what matters. But their reunion was short-lived. Sheriff Wilson approached, his expression grim. Sinclair, you're free of the Kansas charges, but I want you out of Laredo by sundown. We don't need your kind of trouble here. Xavier nodded, unsurprised. I understand, Sheriff, I'll be gone. Savannah pulled away, looking up at him in alarm. Xavier, come with me, he said, his eyes intense as they searched hers. I have a small place up near Amarillo. It's not much, but it's honest work, raising horses. I was heading back there when they caught me in Colorado. Come with me, Savannah. Let's start fresh where no one knows our story. It was everything she'd dreamed of for months, yet the reality of it, leaving her hometown, possibly never seeing her family again, made her hesitate. My father needs to see that I'm not the man he thinks I am. Xavier took her hands in his. Let me speak to him before we go, please. Savannah knew it was a risk. Her father was stubborn and had convinced himself that Xavier was the source of all her troubles, but she nodded. He'll be at the ranch this time of day. The Zimmerman ranch was a modest spread just outside town, with a sturdy main house and several outbuildings. As Xavier and Savannah rode up, Sheriff Zimmerman emerged from the barn, freezing when he saw who accompanied his daughter. Get off my property, he growled, hand moving to the gun at his hip. Xavier dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. Sheriff Zimmerman, I just want to talk. The charges against me were false. It was my twin brother who committed those crimes. A likely story, Savannah's father snorted. Twin brother, how convenient. It's true, Pa, Savannah said, sliding down from her own horse. The judge confirmed it. Telegrams came from Kansas proving it. Her father's gaze flicked to her, then back to Xavier, suspicion etched in every line of his weathered face. "Even if that's true, you still ran out on my daughter, left her to face this town's judgment alone." Xavier nodded, taking the accusation squarely. "Yes, sir, I did, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I left thinking I was protecting her. I wanted to clear my name before asking her to share my life. I was wrong, and I've paid for that mistake every day we've been apart." Sheriff Zimmerman's expression remained hard. "And now you've come to take her away." "I've come to ask your blessing," Xavier corrected him. "But with or without it, I love your daughter. And if she'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my days making up for the pain I've caused her." Savannah moved to stand beside Xavier, taking his hand in hers. "I've made my choice, Pa. I'm going with Xavier." For a long moment, Sheriff Zimmerman said nothing, his gaze moving between his daughter and the man she'd chosen. Finally, he sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "You always were stubborn, just like your mother." He fixed Xavier with a hard stare. "If you hurt her again, there's nowhere far enough for you to run. Understand?" Xavier nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." "Pa," Savannah said softly, "does that mean it means I won't stand in your way?" Sheriff Zimmerman's voice was gruff. "But I ain't giving my blessing, not yet." "That's something you'll have to earn, Sinclair." It wasn't everything Savannah had hoped for, but it was a start. She hugged her father tightly, feeling him hesitate before his arms wrapped around her. "Be careful, daughter," he whispered, "and write to your old man once in a while." "I will, Pa." "I promise." They left Laredo as the sun was setting, riding north toward a future uncertain but full of possibility. Savannah felt the weight of the town's judgment fall away with each mile they put behind them. For the first time in months, she could breathe freely. "Are you sure about this?" Xavier asked when they stopped to make camp that night. "Leaving everything you know." Savannah looked at him in the firelight, at the face she'd dreamed of for so long. "I'm sure about you. Everything else we'll figure out together." The journey to Amarillo took 4 days of rediscovering each other, of sharing stories from their time apart, of planning for a future neither had been certain they would have. Savannah told Xavier about Thomas Blackwell's proposal and the strange coldness she'd seen in him when she refused. "Something about him never felt right," she admitted as they rode side by side across the Texas plains. "Even before you came back, I couldn't bring myself to accept him." Xavier frowned. "Blackwell, that name sounds familiar, but I can't place why." It wasn't until they reached the outskirts of Amarillo that the mystery was solved. Xavier's small horse ranch was nestled in a valley, a modest cabin with several corrals and a large barn. But as they approached, Xavier suddenly reined in his horse. "Something's wrong," he said tensely. "There should be smoke from the chimney. My foreman, Martinez, should be here." They approached cautiously. The place seemed deserted, no horses in the corrals. No sign of the ranch hands Xavier had employed before his ill-fated journey to find his brother. Inside the cabin, they found the answer. The place had been ransacked, furniture overturned, Xavier's belongings scattered. On the table lay a note, held in place by a knife driven into the wood. "Sinclair, your debts are past due. We've taken the horses as partial payment. If you want to keep breathing, bring the rest of what you owe to the Painted Lady Saloon within the week." "TB. TB," Savannah whispered. "Thomas Blackwell." Xavier's face had gone pale. "Thomas Blackwell isn't a cattle investor. He's a loan shark and a swindler. Before I left to find Zach, my horses got sick. I lost half my stock and needed money fast to save the rest. Blackwell offered a loan at what seemed like reasonable terms. And then he raised the interest," Savannah guessed, the pieces falling into place. "That's why he came to Laredo. He was tracking you down and found you instead." Xavier crumpled the note in his fist. When he realized who you were, he must have seen an opportunity. If he married you, he could claim any property I might have through you. The realization made Savannah feel ill. All his attention, his proposal, it was never about me. Xavier pulled her into his arms. I'm so sorry I brought this trouble on you, but I swear, Savannah, I'll make this right. They spent the night in the ransacked cabin, barricading the door as best they could. In the morning light, they assessed the situation more clearly. The barn was empty of horses, but the tools remained. The well was untouched and the land itself was still fertile. We can rebuild, Xavier said as they stood on the porch surveying what remained. It won't be easy, but if we work together. Savannah squeezed his hand. First, we need to deal with Blackwell. He won't just go away. I know. Xavier's jaw was set in a determined line. I'll go into town today, see what I can find out. You should stay here. Not a chance, Savannah replied firmly. We face this together. That's how it's going to be from now on. Amarillo was a growing town, bigger than Laredo and rougher around the edges. The Painted Lady Saloon sat on the main street, its gaudy facade a stark contrast to the more respectable establishments around it. Wait here, Xavier told Savannah as they dismounted outside. If I'm not out in 15 minutes, go to the sheriff's office. But Savannah shook her head. We go in together. I didn't come all this way to wait outside while you face danger alone. Xavier looked like he wanted to argue but eventually nodded. Stay close to me. The saloon was dim and smoky despite the early hour. A few patrons nursed drinks at scattered tables while a piano player half-heartedly tapped out a tune in the corner. Behind the bar, a burly man with a scar across one cheek looked up as they entered. Well, Xavier Sinclair, heard you were locked up. Not anymore, Xavier replied evenly. I'm looking for Thomas Blackwell. The barkeeper's eyes flicked to Savannah, then back to Xavier. Upstairs. Office at the end of the hall. He's been expecting you. They climbed the stairs side by side, Xavier's hand never straying far from his gun. The hallway was lined with doors, most closed, though sounds of laughter and conversation drifted from behind them. At the end of the hall, a polished oak door stood slightly ajar. Xavier pushed it open to reveal a well-appointed office. Behind a large desk sat Thomas Blackwell, looking every bit the successful businessman in his tailored suit. Sinclair, he greeted coldly. I see you managed to wriggle out of those charges. His gaze shifted to Savannah and his expression hardened. And Miss Zimmerman, what a touching reunion. We've come about the horses, Xavier said, keeping his voice level, and to settle any legitimate debt I owe. Thomas laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Legitimate, the debt is whatever I say it is, and right now it stands at $5,000. Savannah gasped. It was an impossible sum, more than most ranchers made in years. That's robbery and you know it, Xavier said. The original loan was for $500. Even with interest it couldn't possibly. Penalties, Sinclair. For late payment, for disappearing, for making me chase you halfway across Texas. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Of course, there might be another way to settle the debt. His gaze lingered on Savannah in a way that made her skin crawl. Xavier took a step forward, his hand moving to his gun, but Savannah caught his arm. No, she said quietly. That's what he wants. For you to draw on him so his men can kill you. Thomas slow clapped, his smile predatory. Smart girl. Smarter than I gave you credit for in Laredo. He opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. Here's my offer. Sign the deed to your ranch over to me and I'll forgive the debt. You walk away with your lives and whatever you can carry on your backs. And if we refuse, Xavier asked, though he clearly knew the answer, then I'll have my men beat you to death, and Miss Zimmerman will find herself with very limited career options in this town. Thomas's smile widened. Your choice. The silence that followed was tense with unspoken violence. Savannah's mind raced, searching for a solution that wouldn't end with them destitute or dead. "There's another option," she said suddenly. "A horse race." Both men turned to look at her in surprise. "The summer festival is next week," Savannah continued, thinking quickly. "There's always a race with cash prizes. If Xavier wins, the debt is forgiven. If he loses, we sign over the ranch and leave Amarillo for good." Thomas barked a laugh. "A race? What is this, a children's story?" "Besides, Sinclair doesn't even have a horse anymore. I took them all, remember? He has one," Savannah countered. "The black stallion you couldn't catch. The one that ran off when your men came. I saw his tracks around the ranch this morning." Xavier shot her a questioning look, but Savannah pressed on. "Shadow, you've been breaking him for months, haven't you, Xavier? Said he was the fastest horse you'd ever seen." Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes. "That's right. Even wilder than you said, but he's coming along. Be ready for the race by next week, I'd wager." It was a bluff. There was no black stallion, at least none that Savannah knew of, but Thomas didn't need to know that. What mattered was buying time. Thomas studied them suspiciously. "And I'm supposed to trust that you won't just run as soon as you leave here." "We'll stay in town," Xavier offered. "At the hotel. You can have your men watch us if you want, and I'll put down a bond my father's pocket watch. Solid gold worth at least 200. For a long moment, Thomas deliberated. Finally, his greed won out. "Fine. A race. 1 week from today. If you win, the debt is cleared. If I win, I get the ranch and you two disappear. And to make it interesting, I'll even let you have one of the horses I took from you, not that it'll matter. My thoroughbred has never been beaten." Outside the saloon, Xavier turned to Savannah, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "A black stallion. I had to think of something," she whispered. "We needed time." "Time for what? We don't have a horse that can beat Blackwell's thoroughbred. We barely have a roof over our heads." Savannah took his hands in hers. "We have each other, and sometimes that has to be enough." They took a room at the modest hotel on the edge of town, paying with the last of Savannah's savings. That evening, as they shared a simple meal in the hotel's dining room, Xavier outlined their options. "We could leave tonight," he suggested in a low voice. "Head south, maybe into New Mexico territory. Blackwell has influence here, but it might not extend that far." Savannah shook her head. "Running won't solve anything. He'd find us eventually, or someone else like him would. No, we need to stand our ground." "But how? We need a horse, a fast one, and we have no money to buy one." Savannah thought for a moment. "What about your foreman, Martinez? Would he help us?" Xavier's face brightened slightly. "If I could find him. Martinez is a good man. He wouldn't have just abandoned the ranch unless Blackwell's men forced him out. Then that's our first step. Tomorrow we start asking around town. Someone must know where he went." Their search began at dawn. They split up to cover more ground, Xavier checking the livery stables and saloons, while Savannah inquired at the general store and the church. By midday, they had a lead. Martinez had been seen heading north out of town the day Blackwell's men raided the ranch. "North is where his sister lives," Xavier explained as they shared a quick lunch. "On a small farm near the Canadian River. If he was looking for somewhere safe to go, that would be it." They set out that afternoon, borrowing horses from a livery stable on the promise of payment upon their return. The ride north took them through rolling grasslands that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. By sunset, they spotted the small farmhouse nestled in a valley beside the river. As they approached, a rifle barrel appeared in the window, followed by a man's voice calling out in Spanish to identify themselves. "Martinez," Xavier called back. "It's me, Xavier Sinclair." The door flew open, and a middle-aged Mexican man emerged, his weathered face breaking into a smile of disbelief. "Patron, we thought you were dead or in jail." Introductions were made, and soon they were seated at the kitchen table of Martinez's sister, Maria, who served them a hearty meal while Xavier explained their situation. "Blackwell's men came 2 days after you left to find your brother," Martinez said, his expression grim. "They said you owed money and weren't coming back. They took the horses all but that wild black one you've been working with. He broke free and ran off into the hills." Savannah nearly choked on her food. "There really is a black stallion," Xavier nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Shadow. I found him as a colt after his mother was killed by wolves. He's faster than any horse I've ever seen, but wilder than the wind. I've been trying to break him for months." "And you think he could win this race?" Savannah asked. "If we can find him and if I can ride him without breaking my neck." "Yes." Xavier looked to Martinez. "Have you seen any sign of him since?" Martinez exchanged a glance with his sister. "Maria's boy saw him 3 days ago, drinking at the river just upstream from here. Said he wasn't alone. There's a small herd of wild horses that roam these parts. He seems to have joined them." It was more hope than they'd had that morning. They spent the night at the farm, and at first light, Xavier, Savannah, and Martinez rode out to find the wild herd. The search took them deep into the rough country north of the river. By midday, they had found tracks a dozen or so horses moving through a narrow canyon. "They'll be looking for water," Martinez said, studying the ground. "There's a small lake in the valley beyond these hills. If we hurry, we might catch them there." They rode hard, taking a route that would bring them to the lake ahead of the herd. As they crested the final hill, Savannah gasped at the sight below. A pristine lake, its surface glittering in the afternoon sun, nestled in a green valley. And at its edge, drinking cautiously, were the wild horses. At the front of the herd stood a magnificent black stallion, his coat gleaming like polished onyx, his head held high and alert. "Shadow," Xavier breathed. "He's even more beautiful than I remembered." They approached slowly, carefully, knowing that any sudden movement would send the herd fleeing. Xavier dismounted when they were still a good distance away. "Stay here," he told Savannah and Martinez. "If too many of us approach, they'll bolt." Taking only a length of rope, Xavier began the slow process of approaching the wild stallion. Savannah watched, heart in her throat, as he moved with infinite patience, stopping whenever Shadow raised his head, moving forward only when the horse seemed calm. It took over an hour for Xavier to get within 20 feet of the stallion. All the while, he spoke in a low, soothing voice, words Savannah couldn't hear but whose effect she could see as Shadow's ears flicked forward, listening. And then, miraculously, the stallion took a step toward Xavier. Then another. Savannah held her breath as horse and man regarded each other across a narrowing gap. "That's it," she heard Xavier say. "You remember me, don't you, boy? We're friends, you and I." Shadow snorted, pawing at the ground. For a moment, Savannah thought he might charge or flee. But then, with a grace that belied his wild nature, the stallion closed the final distance and allowed Xavier to place a hand on his neck. "I'll be damned," Martinez whispered beside her. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it." The next step, getting a rope around Shadow's neck and persuading him to be led, was more challenging. Twice the stallion pulled away, and once he reared up, nearly striking Xavier with his hooves. But patience won out, and by sunset, they were leading a skittish but compliant Shadow back toward the farm. "Will 5 days be enough?" Savannah asked that night as they settled the stallion into Maria's small barn, to prepare him for the race. Xavier stroked Shadow's nose, earning a gentle nuzzle in return. "It has to be. We don't have any other choice." The days that followed were a blur of activity. While Xavier worked with Shadow from dawn until dusk, Savannah and Martinez gathered intelligence about the race in Blackwell's thoroughbred. What they learned was concerning. "His name is Thunder's Pride," Martinez reported after a trip into Amarillo. "Brought him all the way from Kentucky. He's won races in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Dallas." "And the race course?" Xavier asked, not pausing in his work of running Shadow in circles on a long lead. 3 miles out from town and back. "Mostly flat terrain, but there's a creek crossing and a stretch of rocky ground that could be tricky." Savannah watched Shadow's powerful movements, the fluid grace with which he responded to Xavier's commands. "Can we win?" Xavier's determined gaze met hers. "We have to." By the day before the race, Shadow was accepting a saddle and bridle with minimal resistance and responding well to Xavier's guidance. He was still wild at heart, they all knew that, but there was a bond forming between horse and rider that gave them hope. "Tomorrow," Xavier said as they stood together outside the barn that evening, "we ride for everything." Savannah leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "No matter what happens, we face it together." Race day dawned clear and hot. They rode into Amarillo early, Shadow prancing nervously between them. The town was bustling with festival activity, bunting hung from buildings, vendors called out their wares, and children darted through the crowds with sticky candies clutched in their hands. At the edge of town, a starting line had been marked across the main road. A crowd had already gathered, placing bets and admiring the horses being prepared for the race. At the center of attention was Thomas Blackwell, resplendent in an expensive suit, standing beside a magnificent chestnut thoroughbred. "Well, well," Blackwell called when he spotted them. The drifter and his lady actually showed up, and with a horse, no less. His mocking gaze took in Shadow, who was tossing his head and eyeing the crowd warily. "A bit wild for a race, isn't he? Might be safer for you to forfeit now, Sinclair." "We'll take our chances," Xavier replied coolly, dismounting and leading Shadow to the starting line. The race had drawn 6 entrants in total: Xavier on Shadow, Blackwell on Thunder's Pride, and 4 local ranchers on their best quarter horses. As the riders prepared, Savannah made her way to Xavier's side. "Be careful," she said, helping him adjust Shadow's saddle. "Blackwell won't play fair." Xavier's hand covered hers. "I know, but neither will we." He leaned in close, whispering in her ear. "Watch Blackwell during the race. I have a feeling he'll try something, and I need you to be my eyes." Before she could ask what he meant, the race official was calling for riders to take their positions. Xavier swung up onto Shadow's back, gathering the reins as the stallion danced in place, eager to run. "One final thing," he said, looking down at Savannah with an intensity that took her breath away. "When this is over, will you marry me? Whatever happens, whatever we have or don't have, I want to start each day by choosing you." Tears sprang to Savannah's eyes as joy flooded through her. "Yes. Yes, I will." The starting pistol cracked and the horses leaped forward in a thunder of hooves. Shadow surged ahead immediately, his powerful stride eating up the ground. But Thunder's Pride was right beside him, the 2 horses neck and neck as they left the town behind. Savannah raced to the church, where the tall steeple offered a view of the race course stretching out across the prairie. Through borrowed field glasses, she watched as Xavier and Blackwell pulled ahead of the other riders, their horses matching stride for stride. Then, as they approached the creek crossing, she saw Blackwell reach into his jacket. A glint of metal in the sunlight, a gun. No, something smaller. As the horses plunged into the shallow water, Blackwell leaned across the gap between them and made a sharp movement toward Shadow's hindquarters. The black stallion reared suddenly, nearly unseating Xavier. By the time Shadow was under control again, Thunder's pride had gained a significant lead. Through the field glasses, Savannah could see blood on Shadow's flank. "He stabbed him," she gasped, drawing curious looks from those around her. "Blackwell stabbed Xavier's horse." But no one else had seen it, and the race continued. Xavier bent low over Shadow's neck, urging the stallion on despite the injury. Slowly, incredibly, they began to close the gap. Shadow's powerful strides ate up the distance, his wild heart seemingly immune to pain as he chased down his rival. As the riders rounded the halfway marker and turned back toward town, they were once again neck and neck. Savannah could see the determination on Xavier's face, the strain in every line of his body as he pushed Shadow to greater speed. The rocky stretch loomed ahead 100 yards of uneven ground that would test both horses' surefootedness. Thunder's pride, bred for manicured racetracks, began to falter, his stride becoming uncertain. But Shadow, born to the wild, picked his way through with barely a break in rhythm. As they emerged onto the smooth prairie again, Shadow pulled ahead by a length, then two. Blackwell's face contorted with rage as he whipped Thunder's pride mercilessly, trying to close the gap. The final stretch back to town became a battle of wills, Blackwell's desperation against Xavier's determination, Thunder's pride's bred speed against Shadow's wild heart. Side by side they thundered down the main street, dust billowing behind them, the cheers of the crowd growing louder with each stride. 20 yards from the finish line, Blackwell made one last desperate move. He swerved Thunder's pride directly into Shadow's path, the larger horse's shoulder slamming into the stallion. Shadow stumbled, nearly going down. Xavier clung to his back as the stallion fought for balance. In that moment of chaos, Thunder's pride pulled ahead, but Shadow wasn't finished. With a surge of power that seemed to come from some deep reserve, the black stallion regained his footing and lunged forward. The final yards became a blur of flying manes and straining muscles. They crossed the finish line together, so close that for a moment, no one knew who had won. The race official hurried to confer with his assistants, examining the finish line from different angles. Xavier slid from Shadow's back, immediately checking the wound on the stallion's flank. It was bleeding but didn't appear deep. Savannah pushed through the crowd to reach him. "He cheated," she said breathlessly. "I saw him stab Shadow at the creek." Xavier nodded grimly. "I felt it happen. But unless the official saw it too, the winner," the race official announced, silencing the murmuring crowd, by half a head Shadow ridden by Xavier Sinclair. A cheer went up from the townspeople, who always enjoyed seeing an underdog triumph. Xavier's face broke into a smile of disbelief and joy as he embraced Savannah. "We did it," he whispered against her hair. "We actually did it." But their celebration was short-lived. Thomas Blackwell stormed up to the race official, his face contorted with rage. "This is an outrage. That wild animal bumped my horse. I demand a review." The official stood his ground. "The result stands, Mr. Blackwell. If anything, it was your horse that interfered in the final stretch." Several witnesses saw it. Blackwell's gaze darted around the crowd, looking for supporters but finding none. His power in town came from fear, not loyalty, and no one was eager to back a loser. "This isn't over, Sinclair," he snarled, turning to Xavier. "That debt still stands." "Actually," a new voice cut in, "I believe it doesn't." Sheriff Carson pushed through the crowd, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "Thomas Blackwell, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, extortion, and assault." Blackwell's face drained of color. "On what grounds?" "Got a telegram yesterday from the marshal in Fort Worth. Seems you're wanted in 3 states for running the same scheme, loaning money to struggling ranchers, then raising the interest to impossible levels so you can seize their property. The sheriff produced a pair of handcuffs. And now we can add attempted murder to the charges. Miss Zimmerman here isn't the only one who saw you stab that horse. As Blackwell was led away, protesting loudly, Xavier turned to Savannah with wonder in his eyes. "It's over." Just like that, she laughed, the sound pure relief and joy. "Just like that. The ranch is yours again. We're free." That evening, as the festival continued around them, Xavier and Savannah sat on a bench outside the church, Shadow grazing contentedly nearby, his wound cleaned and bandaged. "I never properly answered your question," Savannah said, leaning her head against Xavier's shoulder. "Yes, I will marry you tomorrow if you want." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "I was thinking we might wait a week or two, give your father time to get here. I sent a telegram this afternoon." Savannah looked up in surprise. "You did?" "I promised to earn his blessing, remember, and I mean to keep that promise along with all the others I make to you." Xavier's gaze was tender as it met hers. "Starting with this one, I will choose you every morning, Savannah. Every single day for the rest of our lives." 2 weeks later, on a perfect autumn day, Savannah Zimmerman became Savannah Sinclair in a simple ceremony on the porch of the ranch house. Sheriff Zimmerman had arrived 3 days earlier, his initial coldness toward Xavier thawing slightly as he saw the home and life his daughter would share. "He's still a drifter at heart," he grumbled to Savannah the night before the wedding, "but I reckon he's put down roots now. And he looks at you like you hang the moon, which counts for something." "He's a good man, Pa," Savannah said, squeezing her father's hand. "You'll see." Martinez served as Xavier's best man and Maria as Savannah's matron of honor. The small gathering included several neighbors and a few townspeople who, now that Blackwell's influence was gone, were eager to establish good relations with the young couple. As they spoke their vows, Shadow watched from the nearest corral, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the importance of the moment. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up that startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree. "Mrs. Sinclair," Xavier murmured against Savannah's lips after their first kiss as a married couple. "How does it sound?" "Like home," she replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Like everything I ever wanted." In the years that followed, the Sinclair ranch prospered. Xavier's skill with horses became legendary in the region, and Shadow sired a line of foals that combined his wild speed with more manageable temperaments. Savannah discovered a talent for breeding and raising the special herbs and plants needed for medicines, supplying the doctor in Amarillo, and eventually opening a small shop in town. Their first child, a son they named James, arrived a year after their wedding. He had Xavier's green eyes and Savannah's determination. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later with her mother's golden hair and her father's way with horses. Sheriff Zimmerman retired and moved to a small house on the edge of their property, grumbling about the noise but never missing a moment with his grandchildren. Martinez remained their loyal foreman, overseeing the ranch hands with firm fairness. Thomas Blackwell spent 10 years in prison before being released. He left Texas, rumors saying he'd headed to California to try his luck in the gold fields. Whatever became of him, he never troubled the Sinclairs again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Savannah by taking her to the lake where they had found Shadow. They made camp beneath the stars, just the two of them, reminiscing about the journey that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked as they lay side by side, watching the night sky. "Being shunned by the town, leaving your home, all because you loved a drifter." Savannah propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at the man who had become the center of her world. "Not for a single moment." Everything we went through led us here to this life we've built together. How could I regret that? Xavier pulled her down for a kiss that still held all the passion of their first. I promised I would choose you every morning, he whispered against her lips, and I have, every day for 10 years. And I've chosen you right back, Savannah replied, her heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. Every morning, every night, every moment in between. As the stars wheeled overhead, they held each other close, secure in the knowledge that some loves are worth any price, even the judgment of an entire town. For in choosing each other, they had found not just love, but home, family, and a happiness that neither had dared to dream possible when a drifter rode into Laredo, and a sheriff's daughter fell in love against all wisdom and convention. In the end, it wasn't about defying the town or proving the gossips wrong. It was simpler than that. It was about two people who recognized in each other something worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth risking everything to claim. And in that recognition, they had found not just each other, but themselves.